Alright, so this is a continuation of the 104 resin tail infusion. Now I have both halves of the tail ready to be joined. All I did was I pulled it out, trimmed the tail, and then sprayed the mold back with some PVA and set them back in the PVA and let that dry. And it holds it in there while you join the two halves together and makes it nice and easy. So first I have some carbon pieces laid out. We'll wet those out, and a few foam inserts, and a small bearing assembly which will make the full flying stab. Gotta mix up some epoxy. I'm just using the same epoxy that I used for the resin infusion. It's a little bit on the thin side, but it works pretty good. I'm going to mix this together for about 2 to 3 minutes till it's nice and clear, and then wet out the carbon. Alright, now I've mixed the epoxy thoroughly for a little over 2 minutes. It's nice and clear now. It's kind of hard to see. There's a few air bubbles in there, but there's no milky look to it. I'm going to wet out all these carbon toes, and all these carbon toes are leftovers from the original carbon, and you just pull a strand out, and that's why I say I always save those, because they're very useful. Now this is going to be in the middle. This carbon piece in the middle, you got to be really careful to keep it dry, because that's actually going to be, I'm going to cut out a little bit in here and glue that to the airplane, and the airplane will be held by that, and then these just pivot, they're like little pivot blocks. And one of these go on each side of that foam. So now's the messy hard part, to get everything in place. There we go, we got one on each side. Now I want to make sure this is tight so it doesn't have any slop back and forth. And center this whole assembly. And then we'll add on to it. Alright, that looks pretty centered. Now I have another little center spar. The tail's going to be driven, it's going to be hinged in the middle and then driven in the back up through the rudder. So this one here will be a little bit to grip onto, and that'll actually actuate the tail. And I just realized I screwed up. I was going to put these two on the bottom and then put a cross piece. I'm going to cut it in half, and I think I'm just going to put it on top so I don't ruin everything. I just have two little supports going back and forth. Alright, now add the 3 more pieces on the top, and the structure will be complete. Just trying to get as close to that carbon rod as possible without touching it. Alright, all the carbons in place. Alright, now it's time to mix some colloidal silica, which is just West Systems. It comes in a little tube. And I still have that epoxy that we mixed up, and they'll go in there. This stuff is just a real fine powder. Let you see it. It's just a real fine powder. And you just keep adding it until it turns like toothpaste and it stops running. At first you'll mix it and the epoxy, it'll thicken up a little bit, but it'll still run. Like you want to be able to put it on a vertical surface and it won't fall down. So it's starting to thicken up and needs more. Alright, so now it's thick and creamy and it won't fall, it won't run, so it's ready to go. Now you take a plastic Ziploc bag, turn it inside out and poke a corner out, and that's where you want to add most of your mixture. And we're just making kind of like a frosting bag, and then we'll put a nice bead of epoxy all the way around the edge of this and then clamp it together. Alright, now you carefully fold this back to the inside of the bag and then pull it back to its original shape. Try and pull that corner out. Alright, and then squish it as best you can into the corner. Then you'll see there's air bubbles and it's not really that clean. So a trick you do is you grab the opposite corner and spin it around, kind of where I got the camera. You won't be able to see it. But you whip it around as good as you can and it forces it all into the corner, and then you just twist it off and get a nice little bag of epoxy. Now take a dirty pair of scissors, clip off the corner, and you're ready to go. Alright, so first thing, you just want to bead all the way around the edges, and I'm going to add a little bit more up front than in the back, add a little bit more weight up front. You don't ever want the front to come undone, and a little bit of extra weight will actually mass balance it a little bit. Trailing edge doesn't need that much because it's kind of skinny. Now I'm just going to put a little bit extra on the tops of these. Make sure that they glue in well. Problem with these closed constructions is you can't ever inspect it afterwards, so you have to overdo it a little bit just to make sure everything sticks. So that's it for that side. I set it. You could probably clamp it together and get away with it, but I always do both sides, and I've never had one delam yet. Alright, that's it for the glue. Now it's one last time to make any corrections. Just make sure all this is perfectly centered. Yeah, just a little bit up here. Alright, looks like we're ready to join it. Always do one last check, because once it's closed, it's done. Alright, looks good. Now you want to make sure you lay it down without it shifting. So I got those little points that key in. Just try and get those to key in. There, come down straight. Put a spring clamp on it just to hold it while I use some C-clamps. The C-clamps really hold it hard. So I'll have to break out the big guns. Got a few big quick clamps, which work great, and put a ton of pressure on it. That one doesn't fit. Alright, that should do it. These big quick grip clamps, they're pretty strong. So now I'm just going to go throw this out in the garage where it's probably 95 degrees out, let it cure for a day, and we'll pop it open tomorrow. Also, a little tip, always stick this bag of glue out there with your part, and then you can always tell how hard it's getting. So you want to make sure it's really hard before you pop it open. You wouldn't want to have an accident and it's not quite glued together. So thanks for watching.